So welcome everyone. I'm Abby Ingber, the Executive Director of the National Education Alliance for Borderline Personality Disorder. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's Family Connections Alumni Institute program, More Validation Skills. The National Education Alliance for Borderline Personality Disorder is a nonprofit organization that provides education, raises public awareness and understanding, decreases stigma, promotes research, and enhances the quality of life of those affected by borderline personality disorder and related problems, including emotion dysregulation. We have the largest virtual library online with information related to BPD. We bring together clinicians, researchers, people with lived experience, and family members at conferences around the world. Our signature program is Family Connections, which you are all quite familiar with. We are pleased to bring you this webinar today to continue learning and practicing the skills that you learned in your Family Connections program. Just a few updates about this program. It's being recorded, and Zoom will send you an email with the recordings in 24 to 72 hours. Your video has been disabled and all participants are on mute. You can submit your questions via Q&A, the questions and answers. We have people backstage who will be answering some of the questions, and at the end, we'll also pose some questions to our panelists. The presenters and panelists will answer as many questions as time permits, but we also ask that you keep your questions general and specific to the topic. This is not a forum to ask for advice on a personal situation you may be experiencing. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Michelle and Chaim. Michelle and Chaim are siblings who have both taken our Family Connections program and are current leaders of the program. And they come from a little bit of a unique perspective. We have so many Family Connections leaders who are parents, and Chaim and Michelle come from a little bit of a different category, which they'll let you know a little bit about. But we look forward to presenting this program to you today for you to hear not only about validation, but about other relationships to BPD that are a little bit different and unique for many of our people who take our Family Connections class. So it is my pleasure to introduce Michelle and Chaim to you.
Thank you, Abby. I really appreciate that introduction. My sister and I were very honored to have the opportunity to address you all today. Large audience of people, like-minded people living in a similar situation, and it's the whole experience here has been really a very pleasant, uplifting experience for me, just taking the course, as well as the opportunity to to learn the skills, work on the skills, and share the skills with you. And my sister had presented the idea of us presenting on validation specifically, and I jumped at the opportunity because I personally have a lot of gratitude to validation. Specifically, validation has literally saved me from fistfights, parking tickets, employment issues, relationship issues, nothing to do with my my person. And that was something that I really wanted to focus on in this presentation to you. Something that comes up a lot in the classes that I've led was the people tend to, when we get to validation, talk about how it's very difficult to validate in the moment, and they really have difficulty validating. And to that, I asked them, well, when do you practice validation, and how, and under what circumstances? And usually you get a whole lot of crickets in the background. And that's kind of what we want to talk about, is that validation is such a valuable skill in interpersonal relationships all over the place, that really the way to practice it and the way to master it is by doing it not with your loved one. And we want to talk about some of the upsides of validating not your person, in order, if no other reason, in order to have the skill trained, ready, and able to be used when the opportunity needs to present itself. So that's hopefully what we're going to give you today. We're going to talk about lots of different ways of potentially coming to validation and why it's going to potentially help you and hopefully this skill will wind up meaning as much to you as it means to us.
Wow, I don't know if I can beat that, but I'm going to take a stab at it. Actually, I'm more like I'm going to go tug at your heartstrings now, because not just you, Chaim, but everybody. Because so my motivation in wanting to do this session, I think, it's certainly aligned with yours, but I had a different angle into why specifically I wanted to do this topic and why with you. Because we, and this is a preemptive shout out to all the parents out there who are, as Abby mentioned, most of the time when we're both our co-facilitators as well as most of the participants in our groups are usually parents of, or oftentimes are parents of a loved one who's suffering with BPD. In our case, our person, or at least one of our people, was our mother, and so we were raised in what I would consider to be among the least validating possible environments, and so it's often the case that we have the experience of having parents come in the room and feel so guilty that perhaps they had something to do with their loved one receiving a BPD diagnosis, and because we now know that this condition has biosocial roots, right, and an invalidating environment is one vulnerability factor. And so I will just say, for all of those parents who might feel guilt that perhaps they had something to do with their loved one getting BPD, my brother and I were raised by a family of origin that are Holocaust survivors, and it's really common amongst Holocaust survivors to have BPD oriented experiences, and so if anybody should have BPD, it's definitely us, for both the bio and the social reasons, and yet here we are not having that experience. So I just, really want to take a moment before starting to say that there's correlation but not causation in those factors. And so please, I hope that everybody who's here has had a great experience, as I have, with, family connections releasing guilt around what we could not have known before we knew it, because I don't know about anybody else, but they didn't teach validation in school when I was a kid, and we most certainly did not learn it in my household growing up. So, my motivation in wanting to do this session with my brother was I had become a family connections facilitator prior to when he did, and had worked with him. He had been a student or a participant in one of my classes, and when we got to the validation module, which is my favorite module, and I'm not afraid to tell my classes that, even though I know we're not supposed to have favorite children, this one is my favorite. And it is my favorite because I mentioned that I felt we grew up in an environment that was, really challenging for this factor. And so in particular, in this module, when I got to the section of 101 ways to invalidate, I had intended to send the missive on which I outlined all of the ways in which my mother perfectly did each of those invalidating things I intended to send it to only my brother, but accidentally sent it to the entire class. So, it got really personal really fast in that session. And, I really felt that it would be a good opportunity today to talk through what it's like to learn validation, later in life, and how life-changing it can be. For me, I first experienced validation in a professional environment, because growing up, our mother, like many BPD sufferers, had an outrageously high IQ. A lot of our people are incredibly smart, and so in my experience, at least in my household growing up, and she is not to blame. She had an incredibly painful experience of her own growing up in an environment influenced by the Holocaust. And so, she was really very invalidating, and it was very well hidden. So for us, the experience is, was challenging because when you're being invalidated, it's not, you can't really report that to Child Protective Services or something. That's not like considered abuse, right? By their standards, right? So I first experienced validation at work, and it changed my life dramatically. I'll cut the story short, but it resulted in me realizing that I had worth, and caused me to end relationships with many of my members of my family of origin, caused me to change professions, caused me to leave my ex-husband, who was just like my mother. And that's the way in which my life was transformed by validation. And so we're really hopeful today to have the opportunity to change your life in a similar way. In all seriousness, to build upon the skills that have hopefully changed your life and will continue to change your life and your person's life for the better over a long period of time. So what we're going to talk about is what validation is and what it isn't, what it does for the recipient, why it's important. And Chaim's going to focus a lot on how to apply it in a heated moment. I'm going to take some time with how to invalidate the valid, and we'll close with practicing validation skills. Chaim, it's on you. You're on mute, Chaim.
I apologize. My laptop is having issues rebooting itself over and over, and so I'm only able to view on my phone. So that's where I am right now. So you'll forgive me. So what is validation and what isn't it? So I wanted to tell you a very quick story. This afternoon, I teach one period a week in addition to my regular work, and I was in the teacher's room right before class, and one of the administrators came in for something else, and she met me, and it's a school for at-risk teenage girls, high school, and the administrator came by and said to me, Rabbi Goldberg, I just want to let you know that I hear the girls talking amongst themselves, and they really enjoy your class. They really enjoy your class. You're fantastic. So I said, without even having attended tonight's presentation, this administrator clearly understood what validation is. So why did I feel validated in that moment? Well, what she was doing was calling out something that I was clearly attempting to do, right? I want my students to enjoy coming to my class, and realizing that it's something that I'm going to be proud of, right? So there's a certain connection that comes through that. So realize when you're trying to validate something, a lot of the trouble people have with validation is they can't think of what am I supposed to validate. One of the ways you can overcome that is by concentrating on what it is you're hoping to accomplish with your validation, right? So you're not looking to flatter somebody. You're not looking to just tell them what they want to hear. What you want to do is you're trying to connect, right? So you're looking for, number one, finding areas of connection, overlap, and understanding, right? You want to figure out what it is that you can have in common with them. If that means that you can understand what their issues are, you can relate to how they're feeling, you can understand how difficult it must be to deal with the situation that they're dealing with, or how great they must feel at the accomplishment they just accomplished. Those are all ways that you can overlap in understanding, right? You're engaging the other person at their wavelength, right? As close as possible. You want to be able to engage with a person in a way that they're able to relate to. So maybe if this administrator had talked about how deep and enchanting my lectures were, or how much the girls respected me as a person, she might have thought that those were validating statements, but I wouldn't have taken them very much as validating, because frankly, that's not a thing I'm much interested in. And recognizing that that wasn't what I would be going for and complimenting me on it is kind of like when somebody's having a breakdown and you tell them what a lovely shirt they're wearing, right? So you want to keep that in mind, that when you're trying to engage someone, you want to be on their wavelength, right? You want to figure out what it is that they're going to find validating about what's happening, right? Now, one of the easiest things to keep in mind, if you can't think of what to validate, what do I say now? How do I connect with this person, is by asking questions. If anyone has ever taken any kind of direction on how to make small talk at a cocktail party, for example, right? They'll always tell this to you. You want to connect to somebody, ask them about themselves. I'm a very big student of Dale Carnegie. He's very busy with that as well. The idea of just asking someone to talk about themselves, asking questions about what your person is feeling, or wherever it is you're looking to validate, what they're feeling, why they did it, what's important to them. All those kinds of questions, again, everything specific to the situation, is a great way to validate someone, to show interest in them, to connect. What a validation does is it's an approval of the relationship with your person, that you're showing them it's a high priority, right? You're letting them know, hey, I really respect our relationship. I take you seriously. I take this relationship seriously. And that's the message that's coming across, right? It's also a recognition that our person's actions have had some direct effect on what's going on, right? And again, of course, what validation isn't, just to make sure that we're all clear, validation is not flattery. You're not just telling a person how pretty they are, how smart they are, how successful they are. That's not validation. That's flattery. And pretty much everyone can see through that. Somebody who's starved for attention or positive feeling might take it, but it's not going to get you very far. It's like sugar, straight empty calorie. It tastes good for a second, it's not going to stick around. Agreeing with someone is not validation. It could be validating when you agree with what someone's saying, right? Just ask Rush Limbaugh about all his ditto heads. So every time somebody called in and ditto headed him, he felt validated. Oh, I'm a ditto head. I agree with everything you say. So whatever that's worth. But that's not when you're looking to have a meaningful validation of someone. You don't want to just agree with them. Maybe if you want to speak of the reasons why you might agree with them, that would make sense. You also want to avoid, obviously, judgment, condemnation, because that's not validating. And if you think about how you feel when someone judges or condemns you, and how much you want to distance yourself from that person, your person is going to feel the same way. And approving over their actions. That doesn't mean that you don't have to accept everything that's going to be happening, that a person is doing. You don't have to validate everything that a person does, especially if it doesn't go with your values.
Can we get next slide?
Michelle, I think you're muted now.
Oh, I don't think I'm muted. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so for
You're still muted, Michelle.
How about now?
You're not
Oh, it
muted.
looks like I'm going to get to do all the talking today then.
Okay.
Huh?
No, I'm not muted.
Okay.
All right. Well,
who is the? Oh, you can hear her. I just can't. Okay.
Yeah, right. And this is the story of my life, people. I mean, I'm just kidding. With Chaim specifically, I was, growing up, I was constantly poking him, trying to get his attention. And now here I am, 43, doing the same thing. In any case. So what does validation do for the recipient? It's a lot of what Chaim already said, but really importantly, it delivers the message that you don't think that your person is all wrong. It often is the case, and we could hardly blame anyone for feeling this way. It can be really frustrating to repeat oneself many times. It can be really frustrating to have this same conversation over and over again, and to still not be able to control those behaviors. By the way, it's just as frustrating for our person as it is for us. So validating lets the person know that you see them for who they are, that you don't see them as, our people can often have an experience of black and white thinking, where we are either aligned with the forces of evil, or everything we do is great. What validation can do for our person is to let them know that we don't see them in the all black category. As when I'm being validated, what I hear, especially if I've been behaving in a dysregulated fashion, is I'm still lovable even with my intense emotions. Maybe even because of them, but I'm still lovable even with my intense emotions. You still care what I think, and you're trying to help me deal with that. I hear I'm not at risk of being abandoned in this moment. And that is the critical issue with which most of our people are dealing, whether they're able to communicate that to us or not. The experience of living with BPD is one of just intense fear of abandonment all of the time, and having real difficulty controlling oneself, even when we know that that the behaviors are not likely to elicit the responses that we want. There's still so much difficulty for our people in controlling that and changing that. So, you know, they often feel like they don't control whether or not they're going to be abandoned. Validation enables the person to understand that they're not being abandoned in this moment. The important thing when validating here, though, is it has to come off as heartfelt. Otherwise, we get, or at least I've gotten back, don't therapist me, you know, if you're validating and if it's insincere, or if it's just, you know, if it's doesn't come off to the recipient as real, then that's the perception that can often occur, is that our people know we're well trained and they know we know how to do this skill. And if we are not able to truly feel that we want to validate something, then they will be able to tell. There is, you know, my brother Chaim actually shared with me some links that I think you might find of interest that were on this slide. Chaim, they were, you had shared with me some information on empathy versus sympathy related to this slide, as well as a validation TED Talk. So I think while I appreciate that our notes are hidden, now that somebody figured out how to enter it, and it was Abby who figured out how to enter the slides into presentation mode, I think that the slides are going to be shared with you. And in this, in the notes on this slide, if you are a person who enjoys TED Talks, this particular one on validation that's in the notes of this slide is I think a fantastic one.
Thank you.
Back to you, Chaim.
I appreciate that. Okay, so why is validation important?
No, it's the next one is what to do when all else fails, which is feelings.
Okay, so we'll do that. So for this, I think I have a different version of this slide. Okay, so when all else fails, we want to talk about finding the feeling, which I have in my notes as FTF, because a lot of times people get frustrated when they're being attacked, when they're being overwhelmed, and what you want to always do is find the feeling. FTF, find the feeling. Why is finding the feeling so important? Because the feeling is often the easiest thing to validate. And why is the feeling the easiest thing to validate? Okay, because it's a lot easier sometimes, especially when there's a lot of raw emotion happening, to just try and label that. Okay, so even if everything else is happening and you're feeling overwhelmed by it, being able to label emotions puts you in control of the situation and you're not overwhelmed. It kind of de-escalates things in that way. Your loved one will likely, your person will likely recognize right away that you've correctly identified what they're feeling, or at least you've tried to identify it. You've given them the opportunity to potentially correct you as well. So again, your loved one is raging at you, that you've tried to validate them and they're not feeling validated. And you might say, you know what? It seems to me like you're frustrated. Is that what you're feeling right now? And your loved one might be like, yes, I'm very frustrated because I'm trying to tell you what's wrong and you're not listening. And you can say, you know what? I can't imagine what it must be like for you to feel frustrated like that. And I'm sorry that it comes across to you that I'm not trying, and I apologize for that. And I'm doing my best to try. And maybe if we can think of another way to describe it or explain it, maybe that would be the way to go. Again, you find the feeling, it opened up a conversation. That's the thing to go for. So Michelle did mention the link that we had in the notes about the difference between sympathy and empathy, which you could take a look at a nice definition I found that'll describe it. But I want to say it in an overly simplified, not professional way, because I'm an overly simple, non-professional kind of guy. You ready? Empathy is when I'm looking you in the eye and seeing your pain. Sympathy is when I'm standing up here and you are down there. Okay, so if you can imagine, when you sympathize with someone's problems, you're kind of looking down on them. And most people will be able to pick up on that. Okay, so you want to be careful about being in a position where you say, oh, that, like, you know, there used to be an expression when I was a teenager, it sucks to be you. Right, that would be a kind of, I guess, sarcastic kind of sympathy, but you kind of get the idea. Yeah, the idea of too bad on you, well, that must be really tough to be you, right? As opposed to an empathy where I'm trying to imagine what it's like for you eye to eye. When the other person sees you put yourself in that position, that you're trying to empathize, that you're able to see where they are and what it must be like from their position. Doesn't mean you agree with it, doesn't mean you like it, doesn't mean you approve of it, but that you understand it. You've already started the process of building the connection, which again, that's what we're looking for here. The purpose of the validation is to create the connection, to de-escalate, to kind of allow for future good things to come your way.
I wholeheartedly agree, and will just add to what you're saying, Chaim, about why this particular slide is so important. It's because of so frequently, well, it's for all the reasons you already said, but I'll also add another reason, which is oftentimes there's nothing in the behavior to validate, and you still want to progress the relationship forward. So if your person is behaving in a dysregulated way, which happens so frequently for our people because they're so sensitive and so reactive, and with such a slow experience of returning to baseline, that you know, behavior can wind up getting dysregulated and stay there for a really long time. So so this practice of, when all else fails, you find the emotion to validate, can help restore the connection, even when the behavior is so far out of line with where expectations would be in a respecting relationship. So even just again, to say, like, you're slamming the door, you're smashing things, that, you know, this is what's occurring in our environment. It's obvious that you're feeling upset, or at least it seems to me that you're feeling upset if those are the things that are happening. How can I help you with that? You know, exactly what Chaim said, you're not going to validate the behavior of smashing things, but to be so upset as to need to break things is something that we can be empathetic about. Even though we don't validate the behavior, we can validate the emotion. So next slide. You know, why is validation so important? And this is just taken straight from module 5. It's the core of relationships, really. It's because you can't communicate in a relational fashion without validating the experience of the person with whom you're communicating. You know, when I'm validated, I feel like, firstly, I can trust you, and I secondly feel that you respect me. Because if I'm experiencing minimization of my feelings, which, if I'm a person living with BPD, I'm experiencing that all of the time. Everybody around me is always telling me how I'm too sensitive and I'm you know, not normal. So I feel I probably feel disrespected pretty frequently. When I receive validation, because I don't get it all of the time, because my behaviors are not as they'd be expected to be, then I feel disrespected when I'm talked to, you know, from somebody who's trying to correct behaviors. When I'm talking with somebody who's trying to validate me, I can trust that person. I can be less reactive. I can feel self-respect, and so can the deliverer of the validation. validation rate raises everybody in the process, both the recipient who feels seen, but also it feels great to be the person who sees, who can see true things about the person who's oftentimes, experiencing so much challenge in life. And just in general, when we're working our way through relationship challenges, validation is one of the most important skills that we can practice. Both the sender and the receiver of validation feel like the relationship is more worthwhile when validation is part of it. So, when I'll just say from personal experience, when there's no validation involved, it's not terribly difficult to make the decision that is a relationship that is not working for you. So, validation makes the relationship worth having, and is amongst the most critical skills in communication. Back to you, Chaim.
All right, so let's see the next slide.
To be about the heated moment.
Perfect. How do I apply validation in a heated moment? So we kind of touched on that in my previous slide about validating the feeling, right? FTF, find the feeling. First of all, step one, you have to be able to identify that the moment is getting heated. Okay, sometimes you get drawn into what's happening and you're just so underneath the burden of the fight or flight feeling that it's just overwhelming. You just want to either lash out or run away or all those other motions that would kind of go along with however it is you're feeling besides that something heat is happening. Being able to call that out is a great way to kind of level yourself, right? And kind of square up against the situation. So when I was in high school, I used to play on the football team. So coaches always used to tell us when we were playing defense that you never know what the offense is going to throw at you. So especially when you're a linebacker or you're a defensive back, what you want to always do is square up against what's happening. You want to identify it, you want to be able to call it out, you want to read it, and you want to try to communicate that with your teammates, right? So instead of feeling overwhelmed that I don't know, and what if I mess up, you're kind of showing that you're responsible for it, you're the boss over it, and it's not controlling you. So that's a great way to kind of center yourself and get back into the position of being able to protect yourself and get your agenda through. So you want to identify that there's a moment that's getting heated. You want to stop for a second. There's lots of different strategies of how you could do that. For instance, if your loved one is screaming at you and you need something, you could literally just call timeout. I'm into football parables today. You can call timeout. You can throw a flag. No, I wouldn't recommend that. But you can call timeout and say, listen, you know what? I have to go to the bathroom. Then either go to the bathroom or don't go to the bathroom. But changing the venue sometimes gives you enough space to be able to think, what are you going to do next? So you want to stop what you're doing. You want to pause, give yourself, don't react right. Don't say the first thing that comes to mind. It's usually not the right thing, especially when you're under pressure. Don't just give yourself a second, think through your strategy and what it is you're looking to accomplish, right? Okay. Now, you also want to remind yourself of the levels of validation and how they would relate to the strategy that you're looking to go for, right? There's two different things, I guess, that we mean by that. First of all, there's validations that you as the deliverer of a validation are more comfortable with, right? If you're quick to notice people's efforts, you might want to go towards that. If you're great at identifying somebody's emotions, you might that be your default. What you don't want to do is, before you get into that heated situation, to be like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do now, because it's too late. You really wouldn't want your best soldiers under fire to be on the battlefield and be like, well, we got a battlefield guide and we have all these weapons and stuff, and I'm not sure which one to use now. What do you guys think we should use, right? You really don't want to do that. You want to have a clear strategy of what it is you're looking to do and how much this needs addressing. Is it like an all-in kind of thing? Is it a, let's see if I can just de-escalate it a little bit? You want to kind of keep that in mind. I wanted to give an example of validation in a heated moment and how it worked out well. So I mentioned earlier, I'm a real student of Dale Carnegie, and there are 1,000 stories that would illustrate this idea. I just grabbed one, and I'm not even claiming it's the best one, but it's a great story, and I'll use this one. So Dale Carnegie was speaking about himself, and he had like a small dog that he used to walk in a local park unleashed, which is illegal. And there was a police officer mounted on a horseback, I think, that caught him with the dog and like threatened him that if he catches him walking the dog again in the park unleashed, that he's going to give him a ticket and a citation. And of course, at the time, Dale Carnegie got into a fight with him. What do you mean? What's the big deal? And of course, the lawman, you know, he's wearing the badge and he's got to remind everybody how big and tough and important he is. And Dale Carnegie is all feeling invalidated himself. What do you mean? You're accusing me of being like a bad person. I'm like a criminal. I'm not really a criminal. I'm just a normal dog owner, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So they all yelled at each other, as people are wont to do when they don't think it through. And then they went about their day. Well, a couple of weeks later, Mr. Carnegie is taking a walk with the dog again, and he had been on a leash for a while, and the dog didn't like it, and he didn't like it, and he decides, you know what, let's take a chance. Unleashes the dog goes bounding up a hill, and who does he bound into? That's right, the long arm of the law, sitting on top of the horseback. Now, if at that moment they had the same fight, you can imagine there would have at least been a ticket involved with that, if not much more yelling and screaming. Dale Carnegie right away de-escalated the whole thing by just saying to the officer, you know what? You were right. It's not okay to walk your dog without a leash, and I did that, and I did what you told me not to do, and it's my fault, and I deserve whatever comes my way. So of course, to be the bigger man in that situation, Cap has to be like, oh, you know, it's not such a big deal. And then they wind up having a fight the other way, where Dale Carnegie is just like ripping himself up, and the cop is busy telling him, you're really not such a terrible human being, and they all lived happily ever after. De-escalating by identifying what was going on. And in this case, he realized that the other guy needs to be validated by his importance. The officer needs to hear that he is the law and that he's right. And that's what he needed to hear, and that de-escalated the whole thing. So that's what I mean when you want to keep in mind in advance what you're going to do and how you're going to rectify the situation. That's really how you're going to deal with it before the heated moment comes, as opposed to waiting until the heated moment comes and then hoping magically that you come up with something.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And next slide. So we don't advise doing these invalidating the valid, but this is, you know, Chaim mentioned it, the previous slide was his motivation in wanting to do this this session here, and I mentioned that this particular slide which is again excerpted from module 5, is what motivated me to want to do this session, because this is the list that I went through in the class that we had to communicate, intending to my brother, but accidentally sending to the whole group. You know, the ways that a person who has BPD can easily wind up invalidating the, you know, other members of their circle, and it can happen the other way around too. So, you know, some of the key experiences that impacted me with respect to validation in our household growing up, you know, ways to invalidate by diminishing safety. You know, this is a particularly insidious challenge to point out when it's happening. It's very tough to identify that it's happening, or it can be tough to identify that it's happening, you know, in particular because the recipient is the person who feels that their safety is being diminished. But if the recipient is a child and the deliverer is an adult, it would be incredibly difficult for the child to be able to effectively communicate back to the adult that the child is feeling unsafe, in particular if the adult is dysregulated in the moment when the child is being made to feel unsafe, right? So these, you know, but these factors play out in all of our relationships, whether or not there is a power imbalance there. You know, making threats and being coercive and aggressive, especially when the other party is being reasonable, is really the perfect way to destroy your relationship. So is minimizing the other person's feelings or their legitimacy, and that is so incredibly common for our people to experience, because their feelings can be so pronounced, or more pronounced than are the average persons having the same experience. It's incredibly common for their valid experience of being scared or happy or any emotion. All emotions are valid, we learn, right? So, you know, the feelings, minimizing the legitimacy of feelings is never acceptable. It's always valid to have feelings. So when you invalidate another person for their feelings, that's up there among the more challenging errors to overcome in a relationship. Being willful, focusing on being right instead of effective or decent. You know, that happens also so much with our people, because you know, we obviously know what's right, and especially if we're parents, we're for sure right. You know, when it comes to I have a 12-year-old, you could tell I know this for sure. So and it's a girl, so I'm in the middle of like the hormonal experience, but in any case, so you know, so she, you know, has her feelings and her experiences with her, you know, people in her life, and you know, and like she wants a phone, for example, and I just have to keep validating that wanting a phone is perfectly reasonable. That does not mean you're getting a phone, but it is, you know, it is perfectly reasonable that you want it. But it, you know, it can become very easy for a parent to, or very natural for a parent who's heard for the millionth time that their child, their 12-year-old wants a phone. You know, to be just willful about it and say, you know, I'm the parent and I tell you when you get a phone, and like, you know, buck up. You don't get a phone yet. You know, that thought has occurred to me. It's not the most helpful way of addressing the situation, because everybody else in her class has a phone, so she's the only one who doesn't have a phone, and I'm the worst mom in the world. You know, if I were to say back to her when she's feeling bad that she doesn't have a phone, that I'm mom, I'm right, you don't get a phone, instead of, well, yeah, I understand why it, you know, feels bad to be left out of the group chats or whatever. You know, that is a way to destroy the relationship. And I lastly wanted to highlight exactly how invalidating it can feel when somebody makes assumptions about me, or you know, the other way around. But you know, and it can be really tempting to do that when, you know, we've had our relationship with our person for a long time. They tend to behave in certain ways. We've gone through these patterns a million times, and so we're so ready, we're so armored, we're so ready for you know, when they walk in late, to say, I can't believe you're late again. You know, what are you doing? You don't respect me. You just don't know in that circumstance if there was, you know, a life altering accident or something that is the reason why the person is late. So, you know, making assumptions about the other person and accusing them, even if that has been your experience many times before, it's not going to be helpful. It is not going to advance the relationship. Approaching with curiosity will advance the relationship. And when you invalidate the valid, just rupture the relationship so frequently, so deeply, that, you know, it can be really difficult to recover from. Even lastly, not validating enough is invalidating, or not validating at the appropriate level for the seriousness of the concern is still invalidating, even though it's not as obviously invalidating when, you know, when there's a need for validation and the person in the role is not validating to the degree that would be expected. That can feel really invalidating to the recipient. So we're going to move to the next slide, and we're going to do our best to make this video appear big enough. I also, Abby, you could screen share back with me, or I could screen share that in a full screen if it doesn't work when you click on it to to go into full screen mode or people can't see it. But Chaim, I think you wanted to lead this slide and then tell me when you wanted me to chime in.
I do. So I mentioned earlier the need to practice validation. Okay, like most things, you can't just do it when it needs to be done, and you also have to practice it properly. As again, when I was on the football team, coach used to tell us, practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. Practicing doing it wrong just makes you really, really good at doing it wrong. So you want to not just practice validation, but you want to be able to practice it in a way where you're likely to be successful at it and get good feedback in order that you're going to be able to do a better job at it. So my classes, when I get to lead, I always give the example of your cashier. And let me make the case for validating the cashier. I noticed as a regular grocery shopper that when people go up to the cashier, they typically, this is New York City where I live, they typically put their groceries on the cashier on the belt to be scanned and do not speak to the cashier at all, and are usually playing on their phone. And I once noticed that, and I was watching the cashier interacting with the person in front of me and realizing that the cashier a lot of times gets really, really dejected from that. Because if you think about it, here is a person whose entire job at this moment is to serve you personally. Now you'll say that's their job. Yes, it is their job, but they are completely focused on getting your order processed, and you're ignoring them to play on your phone. So I caught that by watching what was happening in front of me, and now I make it a conscious effort to validate my cashier. So I'm like, hey, how are you? And we schmooze. First of all, I don't talk on the phone when I'm on the cashier. If I'm on the phone with somebody already, I will apologize to my cashier. I say, listen, I really apologize. I'm on the phone with my sister. I'm on the phone with my dad. I have to take this call for work. I apologize. And without fail, the person will smile and very generously allow me to finish the conversation. I will take off headphones if I'm listening to music before I go to approach the cashier. I'll ask them how things are going. I'll notice things about them. For example, the other day I went to the supermarket. They had it was right before a holiday, and they were open very early. And I realized that they were probably open from the night before. And I mentioned that to the cashier. And she was so relieved that somebody realized what it's like. She had started work 10 p.m. the night before at 7 a.m. and she's still working. And people get frustrated with her and they're yelling at her when they're running out of stock and things like that. And you say, well, it's really not your fault now just because they ran out of stock, is it? And she laughs, of course it isn't, but what are you going to do? That's people. So, well, I'm really glad that you're able to be positive about it. And thank you for taking care of my order. And I appreciate that you didn't put the eggs at the bottom like the last person did. And we all laugh together and things like that. Validation. Practice it with somebody who's not going to bite your head off. Fair enough? I would like to watch this video. We're kind of running low on time. Are we able to make this go? I'll give a little background what's going on. I grabbed this video. It was originally on Facebook, on Reels. I saw it there. And this is an example of somebody who is about to validate a horse. Now, we're going to talk about validating other things, people, creatures, but I don't really mean to equate my cashiers with a horse. But what I mean to explain is that people make the mistake of thinking of validation and thinking of their person. And I would like to decouple the two. It is not fully about the person. It is about the act of validating and realizing what the other person or the other creature is feeling. So let's read this. Would you like me to read the narration, or do you think people could see it from here?
I'm hopeful that they can see it now. I don't know if this has sound. I don't think so. So just reading the.
Okay, so it's coming up.
Oh, it's just it's a song.
Okay, so yeah, if you can't hear the music on it, you can hear that when you download it yourself. But just watch what's happening. So if you can't figure out what's going on, let me explain. So a man warns his wife who's about to approach this horse that they were trying to corral the horse, and the horse was attacking everyone. But gender bias aside, there were a bunch of men who were trying to get this horse to move from one corral to another, and they were all hitting the horse when it failed to listen. And this lady decided she thinks she knows how to go about getting the horse to move. And her husband, or a man, it doesn't say her husband, I'm sorry, a man grabbed her before she went to approach the horse and said, hey, that horse is nasty, and you can't talk to that horse. So she's like, watch this. And the video shows her progress to go over to the horse, approach the horse in a way that the horse should see that she's not going to cause it any damage. You see the horse kind of jolt back a little bit, and she's calming the horse. She's speaking to the horse in a gentle manner, speaking to the horse, recognizing what the horse might be feeling, and trying to give the assuring idea that she's not the enemy and she's on the horse's side. And she's establishing a rapport with the horse. The horse is nonverbal, obviously, but animals can absolutely pick up in your feelings and your behavior and how you're dealing with them. And the woman succeeds. She literally validated the horse. The horse turned around and followed her and only her to where they had wanted the horse to go. Happily ever after. Literally, she validated a horse. Again, I'm not saying practice on your horse, but it's a great idea. If you have a horse, practice on your horse, because unless you do something really, really bad to your horse, it's not going to report you to anybody. There's not going to be a front page story on the New York Times about what a bad person you are because you didn't validate your horse properly. So if you messed up, you messed up. And animals tend to be a lot more forgiving than humans. So practice on your horse.
I practice on my dog a lot, as his behavior is pretty outrageous. So, but he is, he was when he was a puppy. He's now a year and a half old, and he's much more skillful at his behavior. But I still spend a lot of time validating him and his wants and needs. In the morning, he wakes up and he needs to lick up my nose because he needs to feel connected again. So I validate the dog by allowing him to lick my nose, and for a little bit, and now that you can't respect me at all anymore, it's important for us to summarize this session. But in all seriousness, there are so many people that you can practice validation with. Lots of good examples are children and animals, and even authority figures are people that you can find will reply. Everybody responds to validation. Everybody feels better when they're respected. Validation can be applied wherever you want to build relationships. It's one of the most important skills that we learn in family connections. Chaim, do you want to share your thoughts on this? Sorry. Okay. So I think you wanted to share your thoughts on the slide as well before we turn to questions.
Yeah, just find the feeling, especially when you're in the heat of the moment and you're feeling overwhelmed and nothing else is working your way. Just remember that if you can't think of anything else, just figure out what the other person's feeling, and hopefully that will be the thing you can get yourself started with. That's my suggestion. Okay, now I see that we got some Q&A questions over here. Are we allowed to take those directly, or are we waiting to be prompted?
So what I'm going to do is just make a couple of announcements, and then I think Doreen is here backstage with me, and we'll throw some questions out at you that have been asked. I just wanted to thank you. We are getting tremendous feedback that everyone has really appreciated the program. So Michelle and Chaim, a huge thank you for putting this together. And wanted to let everyone know that we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of Family Connections. It is 20 years since Family Connections has been transforming lives. And on November 5th, we're going to be doing a Zoom to celebrate our 20 years of Family Connections. And we are going to be having speakers, including the creator of Family Connections, Dr. Alan Frazzetti. And we will be talking about validation and observing limits and radical acceptance and all of your favorite skills. So in the chat, I'm going to put a link for you to sign up and register. We hope that you can join us for that. And Doreen, I'm gonna let you take it away with questions.
Hi, Michelle and Chaim. Thank you so much for doing this. So there's a few questions. I think it's definitely people have said thank you and for giving them hope, especially when they can relate to the Holocaust survivors and having them in your family. So I think one person had asked, and she was talking about her mother, but I think it goes to a lot of people. Do you ever tell that person that they think that you think that they have BPD? And so I mean, how do you validate that? How do you bring that up? And I know it's a little beyond validation, but how can you say it in a validating way? Let's put it that way.
So I made an attempt to communicate with some of my family members about my thoughts about them potentially, or their, a person in their household having BPD, and that really was a mistake. I regret having done that. When I first began learning about it, I thought my cousin would be really excited to learn about it, and I learned the hard way that one should not tell family members that we think that they have a condition. So, I think at the same time, though, it's challenging. I mean, we've definitely seen guidance that generally says, it isn't necessarily, our place to tell somebody that they, we suspect they have this condition. We can, but if you can do it with more than one family member and do it in, an interventive kind of way, in the event that it's behaviors that are, life-threatening, that's when I would say to do it. If it's not behaviors that are life-threatening, I probably shy away from, mentioning potential diagnoses, but mentioning that the person is experiencing emotions and that they seem like a lot, and maybe it would make sense to see somebody, and those are all things that make a lot of sense to do, but I've not had a good experience with confronting on possibility of illness. My mother was the only family member who's been supportive of the idea that perhaps this was infecting our family system.
Yeah, I think that's a common situation. I think someone asked if there's and this is again a common situation, if you feel someone used the word abusive, we tend to stay away from that word because it can be very subjective. But if you feel threatened, let's put it that way, if you feel threatened or unsafe, do you still sit there and try to validate someone?
Okay, so I've dealt with this in my classes, and I am the outlier. So everyone should just ignore what I think. But here's what I think. I had someone who I regularly spoke to on the phone with, and that person would sometimes get, I don't want to use the A word, but difficult to deal with, to the point that I felt attacked. And I hung up the phone. I hung up the phone. And I told my class, you're not a punching bag. And if somebody can't understand that they can't speak to you that way, sometimes you just have to walk out. And they asked, well, isn't that going to potentially cause heightened emotions and then they'll feel invalidated? I said, yes, they might. And I'm still not a punching bag. So if I've done what I can to try to listen to them and try to be supportive, and at this point, I'm more likely to say something that's going to ruin the relationship than I am something that's going to help the relationship. So at all turns, you're trying to keep in mind, what is the prize? The prize is not winning this fight or even this conversation or even this interaction, whatever it is. The prize is the relationship. And you have to keep in mind, what is going to forward this relationship? Is letting this person vent a little bit at me going to keep things going, because they're going to vent a little bit and then afterwards realize that that's not okay and come back to me with an apology and try to meaningfully mend what they said or did? Then maybe you want to take it. Maybe you're tired, and if you're just not in the mood to be screamed at or threatened or listen to somebody say 4-letter words at you or whatever the case is, you're a person. We have healthy rights of relatives. We like to give that out to our classes and remind them. You didn't have it before, but NEA just gave it to you. So now you're a human being and you get to be treated just like everybody else in the world does. So hooray for being a human being. And if you can't take it anymore, you just can't take it anymore. You can hang up the phone nicely. You can excuse yourself. You can give them time out. You can come back in 5 minutes. And again, what did I do? I just hung up the phone. And the person that was doing this to me eventually woke up and realized that when they start being abusive, I'm not even going to give them a warning. I'm just going to hang up the phone. And when they try to call back, I just reject over and over again. And I can be just as stubborn and frustrated as you are. And I can reject you 152,000 times, just like you could call me 152,000 times. You will break and I will not. That's me. You got to figure out yourself what your limits are, how it's going, what's the best thing for the relationship. Again, keep your eye on the prize.
I think that's an important thing, is that everyone has their limits. And I think you also mentioned too, you can stop someone in a validating way. You can say, I really understand that you're upset. but I'm going to hang up now or something. So that's often happened. And the next question is, how do you, you mentioned you're both adult children, which is wonderful. It's wonderful to have you on this because so many presenters are parents or something. So how do you handle validation, you know, as an adult child? Because sometimes I think adult children or the adult who has BPD, the parent who has BPD often is like, don't talk to me that way, you know, you're being disrespectful, et cetera, et cetera. So how do you see that dynamic a little different in an adult child situation?
I don't think it is different. I think, you know, I think that the person, you know, is likely to feel that way. You know, they're, you know, in the circumstance of an adult child, I think absent family connections, I would never have learned validation skills. So, you know, so that's, you know, I think, you know, my relationships were much more likely to result in challenging communication because I grew up in this environment where we did challenge one another by being as avoidant as possible. So, you know, so learning how to validate, you know, helped me to be able to communicate with other people, but it did not help me to communicate with my person who had passed away several years ago, and who chose from when I started getting these skills, who chose not to have communication with me. So so I was not able to, you know, communicate with that person. Chaim, do you have more perspective on that?
I think you said it well.
Mhm.
Doreen, can we take, I see there's a question from Denise, and of course I'm partial to questions from Denise because Denise was my co-leader, and I very much respect what she has to say. So is that an option?
Abby, can we, at what time are we supposed to stop? Is it?
We'll take this one question from Denise and then we'll wrap up because I just want to be respectful of your time and everyone else's time.
I know it's always so hard when we can't answer everyone. I'm so sorry.
I appreciate that. So that's why I wanted to grab it before we ran out of time. We're running out of time. Here we go. Hi, Chaim and Michelle. One question I had in class last night as a leader. What do you do when your person throws your validating statements back at you in anger? Okay, so I really wanted to take this because I feel like this kind of speaks to what we're doing here very specifically, that when you're trying to validate and the other person is attacking you with you're not validating well. Okay, because this isn't how well you said this thing, it's how well the person who heard it responded to it. Okay, so if you have all the oratory skills of Daniel Webster, that's lovely when you're getting up on the floor of Congress. And when you're trying to calm an upset person, those oratory skills are worthless. It's whatever's going to work to calm that person. So first of all, please don't think that the issue is your person. The issue is that the way you said what you said didn't strike the desired result. That doesn't mean you said it bad. It just means it didn't get you where you want. So please don't fight about that. When you try to do something and you're not successful, you pivot. You try something else. Validate in a different way. Talk about it. Say, you know what? I see that what I was trying to say is really not working, and I apologize for that, because I bet it's invalidating for you, my listener, my person, to feel like I don't get what you're saying, or that I don't appreciate what you're saying, or again, it depends on what exactly the fight is about. But if it's not working, the validation, that means you haven't hit the right chord. Try something else. Please don't just repeat yourself louder or angrier or explain to your loved one why they're wrong for not feeling validated. I told you this is validating, and what is wrong with you, you rotten. Blah, blah, blah. Don't do that. It didn't work. Try something else. But please keep trying. Please don't give up. Just keep trying.
Thank you both so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This was great. We have such a huge turnout tonight and so many wonderful comments. So thank you both. And good night, everyone. Sorry we couldn't answer all the questions.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.